Hello and welcome to this video on creating a forest planting bonsai. A forest planting is exactly what it says, a series of small trees planted out to create a forest-like appearance. While the name is not confusing, some of the necessary steps can be. As with all bonsai, you will need to create an illusion. This means a range of differently sized trees. That is what gives depth to the illusion. A shallow tray in this case, or a larger tray if you want to make a bigger forest. A bigger can be taller, wider, more trees, or larger trees. The options are far more diverse in this situation. You will also need soil, fertilizer, ground cover, and water. Before starting to plant out your trees, you need a plan. This can be based on either the size, appearance, and number of trees, or an idealized vision. Or one of these is going to go better for you, and we'll use that. We have these trees to choose from. Most are the same size with a few extremes. The biggest will be used for the back and center. The middle-sized trees for the middle side and back sides. The smallest will be in front. The trees will be positioned with a slight bias to one side. The soil will be mounded in a way that creates a quasi-valley appearance. The plan can be seen as it is here, both from a top and side view. One important point that is shown with the alignment of the trees. A forest should ideally have no trees in front of another, that is the trunks, but as the branches grow horizontally, they cannot follow this rule. There will inevitably be overlap in how you look at it from the side. These are the first of two considerations. The right sized tree in the right place for a clear view through. Start by placing your soil. This will need to be mounded up. As with any soil, it is a solid, but it does not want to stay in place, and once you start adding water, it behaves increasingly like a fluid. This means it will try and travel down to an equilibrium. You overcome this with a barrier made of muck. This is a mixture of clay, sand, peat moss, and manure. It creates a semi-water permeable barrier that will drain. You can further support this by adding drainage holes that encourages drainage more efficiently, but they aren't necessary. The muck is used as a wall to hold the soil in place for your trees to be planted. If you aren't inclined to either use or make this yourself, you can use a pot that's got more depth to it and use the edge of the pot as your wall. You just need to be a little more creative in your execution. By using muck this way, it has allowed the valley to be formed. One side is wider and shallower than the other. The other side is slightly taller but more narrow. This makes our terrain. You see two hills and the depth of the valley. From here, we need to go on to planting out our trees. This is why planning is so very important. Knowing which trees will go where makes things much easier. Begin by planting the tallest trees first. In this case, the narrow side of the valley and closer to the crest of the hill. Then you need to plant medium-sized trees towards the valley on that side, and the smallest trees near on top of the hill, ideally with some of the medium-sized ones in between the tallest and shortest. This simulates the natural appearance of a valley, where trees will gradually grow out from their original location, therefore the biggest and oldest trees will be in the center. The same process is replicated on the other side with medium and small trees used. In this particular planting, each tree is part of a triad. Trees should either be in single plantings or larger, odd-numbered groups, never in pairs. The trees are then covered with more soil. The soil will help to keep the trees in place, as it's very difficult to wire them into position with this kind of planting. Now you need to water them in. This will settle the soil between the roots and in place. You may need to add more soil after this to bring it up to the base of the trunk. After the trees, soil, and design is all set up, you apply ground cover. This can be in a variety of options. It ranges from moss to gravel and even large rocks. In this case, we're using a combination of moss and gravel. Moss goes under the trees and gravel in the bottom of the valley to emulate water and grass. You now water this in as well. You'll note that this is getting quite wet, and one reason why we soak it so thoroughly now, but at no other time when planting or trying to grow bonsai, is that it's needed to make sure the roots are set where they need to be. The last thing you want is trees dying in this, or worse yet, falling out and then dying. Having now finished the structural components, and ideally setting it up for the best possible success, you move on to styling. This is similar but different to more common single tree styling methods. You will need to create a mushroom-like shape. This is the general rule of most bonsai: high point in the center, foliage spreading out wide on the sides. Because the foliage grows wide, it will also need to go over the side of the pot you are growing it in. This is done by wiring the branches in place. In this case, you'll often be using a lot of very small gauge wire. For the most part, you treat each side of the valley as a different bonsai. Despite saying that, you do want some continuity between the two, as the narrow side has the tallest trees, and that should be the peak of the canopy, and the other side should be a much wider sloping downside. The branches of each tree cannot take advantage of the detail of a single tree bonsai group planting, so you need to rely on volume rather than intricacy. This does not mean no detail, just less and on a bigger scale. Branches need to be in the right place, and with the right, left, right, and back repetition for each individual tree. The ramification at the end of each branch is not as important in terms of what you see, as one tree to a certain extent will compensate for the shortcomings of another. The trunks, at least in the center, need to have few if any branches on the lower parts. This is because, in the center, this is where the branches would have been growing originally, and they would have gradually died off as the tree grew taller and there was less sunlight available. This extends to the edges of the planting. On the edges, you should have branches coming off from all sides of the tree, but obviously with less strength and growth on the inside edge. These will need to be all the way along the trunk as normal, since this would be what the edge of a forest is normally like. The trees will need to be slightly repositioned or rewired to lean over the valley and out of the planting on each side, and in this case, in towards the river. You will want to wait to do this for a little while. The big reason is you want the roots to become established and they will keep the tree where it is meant to be, and your wiring efforts won't rip it out of the soil. So this will only happen once the soil settles and roots are able to fix the trees in place. It may be 6 months, 12 months, or even a couple of years, depending on the age of the planting you're making. There is one element to this that we have not mentioned. That is, either you can wire your trees before they are planted out, or once they are planted, as we've described in this video so far. If wiring them beforehand, it does solve some of the issues to do with uprooting them while working on the tree. The downside is that should they not take, or they are pulled out, for example by birds, you have not only lost that work, but it's very hard to put a tree back in there to replace it with the same styling. Oftentimes the work you do with a tree before planting it in can't have the same sort of tree put in again because other branches and other growth will get in the way. A forest or group planting can be very nice. They give rise to a sense of size, grandeur, and mise-en-scene that single bonsai just can't. They use otherwise unsuitable bonsai material. While we made a valley, nothing stops you from recreating a mountain, tundra, or anything else that you please for your particular forest. Forest is simply the term used for a group planting in this context. Pennaging might also be applicable, as you can create any scene you desire. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions you have below